Hey everyone, it's Sherry Vegas here, and in this resin tutorial today I'm going to be making a whole tabletop out of resin, and I'm going to be doing an ocean theme to it, but with a little bit of a twist.
To make my tabletop, I'm using the Let's Resin tabletop mold. Now this is a really large side table mold. It's a silicone mold and it comes with 3 table legs included, and the silicone mold is quite thin but it's quite large. I was a little bit concerned when I first pulled it out because it was so thin that sometimes when you pour resin in silicone molds that are that thin, it kind of distorts the shape. But it does come with this plastic band that's quite firm, designed to go on the outside so that way the silicone mold cannot move or flop around when you do pour resin into it, so that way it does hold its shape. So I did think that was quite good that it had that included because the silicone was a lot thinner than other molds I've used. Now with this I want to do a beach inspired tabletop, but I wanted to use some special shells that I only had 1 of each. So instead of going and buying a bunch of shells, I decided I was going to make molds using this silicone putty from the shells that I already had, and then casting resin into them and making more shells that way. So I've got these few different unique shells here. I've mixed up my silicone putty. This one is from Barnes. A few different brands sell it, and I'm then mixing the 2 parts together, which activates it, and pressing my silicone putty and my shell together. And this is so good because within a matter of minutes I have a mold of my shell that I can then start casting resin into, and I can create a whole bunch more of the exact same looking shells. Let's Resin also did send me some of their resin, so this is the deep pour resin to test out. Now I did find that this had quite a strong smell to it, but it was a crystal clear resin. It was really fluid and it had really good bubble releasing properties to it. It's a 2-to-1 and it has quite a long setting time. So I did quite like this resin, and it would be a resin that I would get again. I'm going to keep testing it out and with a few other projects and see how that goes. But with this first one, I actually did pour it quite shallow and I didn't have any issues. Even though it is a deep pour resin, it still worked out fine pouring it shallow. So I think it was about 1 centimeter deep for this first layer of resin. I then gave it a really good mix up and it did get quite bubbly. But I noticed once I left it to set for a few minutes, a lot of those bubbles just came straight up to the surface. And I added some white pigment paste into my resin because the first layer of this tabletop is going to be white. And I'm also adding a little bit of pearl white into it. I did have to mix up some more resin than what I originally thought. So I did do 600 to start with and ended up doing, I think, about 800 or 900, so I mixed up another 200 to 300 on top of what I originally did, just because this is quite large and it took quite a lot just to cover that surface area. So I did that all in white for the first layer. Now with this resin wave tabletop, I wanted to make it a little bit different. So I got this tabletop plastic and I added it in after I poured the resin. I scrunched it all up and I kind of played around with it for a little bit till I got it where I was happy with. Made sure it was in all of the corners, going right up to the edge. And this is just going to create a really cool sort of wave effect on the bottom and just make it look a little bit different. So I played around with this for ages. Then on the end that I have left sort of blank, which I haven't put the plastic going across, is going to be my beach. And I'm just placing some white beach sand down. Now I probably should have waited a little bit longer for the resin to thicken because a lot of this sand did just go straight to the bottom. So I definitely should have waited a little bit longer before I added that in. Now with my shells, if you are going to be using real shells, if you kind of want to make them a little bit special, a little bit shimmery, you can always add a little bit of varnish. So I'm just using some acrylic varnish that I've mixed in with some pearlized pigment, and I'm painting all of my shells. So with this, I made some shells out of resin and then used some shells that I already had, but because I wanted them to all match, I then painted the natural shells with this pearlized pigment all over, so that way they all blended in and it looked a little bit special, because this isn't going to be a normal sort of blue resin wave looking table. It's going to be a little bit more, I guess, fancy. And before my resin had set, I then just went along and placed all of my shells, and I placed as many as I wanted to. I kind of mucked around and played around with a little bit of the design to it. And once the resin did start to gel and get a bit thicker, I then added some more sand on top, so that way it would stick to that first layer of resin. The next day I came back and I removed the plastic, so that way I would get this crinkled textured effect, but I didn't have to keep the plastic in. So it came out pretty easily. It wasn't too hard because it was quite thick plastic. It didn't rip, and the resin was still a bit soft, so it was easy to mold it and like kind of pull it out. The resin hadn't fully hardened. Now, because I want to see this sort of crinkle effect that I've created using that plastic on the resin, whatever color I add on top needs to be a semi-opaque or a translucent color, because if I add an opaque color straight on top, it's just going to completely cover that effect. But by using a translucent color, you're still going to be able to see the effect coming through. So I'm using a pinky goldy pearlized color. It is a discontinued one, and it was from Artie Sue. I think it was like pinky gold. It is quite a beautiful color. When you do add it into casting resin, it does look really pink when it first is in, but then when the casting resin sets, it kind of changes a little bit to more of a peachy tone. But I know it's going to do that, and it's a discontinued color anyway, so that's not really a big deal. But I do want this to be a little bit more peachy than pink. And I'm then adding into this resin all of my more decorative items. So I'm using some pearl beads. I'm also going to be adding more shells into this, because I want to have all of these pearls and shells going the whole way through. And some more of these shells that I casted with resin, I'm going to be adding those on through my piece. And you can see here how much the color changes in that pigment when the resin does set. So it's a lot more peachy toned. And now I'm doing a really deep pour, because I want to make sure I cover all of those shells and I have none of them poking out for the next part. When my casting resin had fully set, it was time to start adding the waves. So I mixed up a batch of my epoxy art resin, and I'm using the epoxy glass resin from Barnes to create my wave effect. So I fully covered the surface area with my art resin. I put a small amount of resin to the side, and I've added some white pigment. Two of my favorite pigment pastes to use to create sort of cells and lacing and that resin wave effect is from, I think it's from Mass, and the other one is from Just Resin, the titanium white. And then I've poured that across. I like to use a blowtorch just really lightly, just to help sort of get that resin flowing. I find doing it just a little bit across where the white is will then make it so much easier for that white to be pushed out when I do use my heat gun or a hairdryer to blow that white going out, which creates that sort of ocean sort of wave effect. Now I did find I got a little bit of an issue and I wouldn't have done it this way again. So I left it in the mold because I thought it might make my life a little bit easier not having to tape it up underneath and I wouldn't have to worry about drips. But because I left it in the mold, it didn't have the ability to pour off on the edges, and I found I got a buildup of white around the edges because it couldn't be blown out and it couldn't just pour off and let those cells sort of spread out beautifully. It was really bunching along those sides and that really annoyed me. It was okay, but I just couldn't really get my heat gun in close enough or blow it out to get a really beautiful effect on the edges. So next time I would definitely take it out of the mold before doing my waves. So this time I did take it out of the mold and I'm going to be doing a second coat and some more waves just because I was not happy with how the first lot of waves were looking. So I've taken it out, I've taped up the bottom to prevent drips from going underneath, and I'm just applying a surface layer of my Barnes epoxy glass resin, and then I'm going to be doing all of the exact same steps again. So pouring just a little bit of white down, adding my blowtorch for a little bit of heat just to help that white flow, and then using my heat gun in one direction to blow those waves across. I'm going to be doing multiple waves at once, so I decided to put all of my waves down first, so the white all down, and then I blew from the back going forward. I'm sorry too if you can hear any sort of noises or barking in the background. My neighbours a few doors down, their dogs have been barking quite a lot lately, and I'm not sure if my microphone is picking that up or not. And this is the finished tabletop. I still need to add the legs on, but otherwise the resin part of this is finished. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm so glad I took it out and redid those waves to get some more of those beautiful cells coming through.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and you got some benefit, please give it a big thumbs up. It really helps the video out on YouTube. And if you are brand new into resin, please go and check out my playlist. I've got multiple videos about so many different types of arts and designs and everything that you can create using resin, and they're all really beginner friendly, so definitely feel free to check those out. And if you are new to my channel and you're not subscribed, please feel free to do so, as I post new videos every single week covering a whole bunch of different arts and crafts topics, and I do a lot of different resin projects as well. But thank you so much for watching.